So this is the second retouch in the series of 2 ads that we did for the Gibson Brands episode of AMC's The Pitch. If you haven't seen the face melting retouch video I created, there's a link below in the description. Once again, the producers of the show had me record my screen while I retouched these shots. Since it didn't make the show, I thought I'd show them here with some commentary. So this is the retouch we call speaker mouth. This video will show you what it took Photoshop-wise to complete the retouch. Just like the other video, got to give a shout out to David Bean. He was working double duty on this shot. He was the photographer and he was the talent. He was nice enough to sit in front of the camera and scream and yell in order to get the straining, screaming shot we needed for this retouch. David is a kick-ass photographer here in Nashville. I've worked with him for years. A lot of the retouch work on my website was produced with David as my photographer. There's a link to my website and David's website below, so check those out. If you have a chance to work with him, do it. He's great to work with, so huge thanks to him. If you want to briefly hear about my process before and during a shoot, check out the face melting retouch. I won't be repeating that here in this video. So some quick information before we begin. It took about 5 hours to complete this retouch. I've obviously sped up the video so you don't have to sit through the entire 5 hours. This retouch took a little bit longer because there was some illustration involved to create visuals that we couldn't get in the studio. So let's get started. Okay, so just like the melting face retouch, the first thing I had to do was pick out a base image. There were 2 factors driving the decision on which base image I started with here. One was obviously David's expression, and the other one was it needed to be an angle that matched the melting face retouch. Since these were going to be related, the 2 ads were going to be related, that if they were side by side, the angle needed to match. So once I got the base image figured out, first thing I did was unhinge his jaw. I knew that the speaker needed to fit in there, so he needed a bigger mouth. So I wanted to make it look like his jaw was unhinged. And I just roughly do that really quick to make sure this shot's going to work. Just roughly put some black in there to kind of just fill out that extra set of teeth to make sure that was the shot that I wanted. Once I figured that out, the next thing I had to do was fill his mouth full of what it should be filled with, which is tongue and the inside of his cheek and his teeth. So I went and found this shot, which showed a little bit more of the inside of his mouth. His tongue was obviously pushed back into his mouth a little bit, so you saw a little bit more tongue instead of lying flat. So I threw that in there in order to patch together some more teeth and to get a tongue back there. Now I knew that the speaker was going to cover up a lot of this detail in the back of his mouth, but at the same time I wasn't for sure how much it was going to cover. So usually if I'm in a situation like that, I'll retouch more than I need to if it's not going to take a very long time. And in this case, finishing out the rest of his mouth wasn't that big of a deal. So you'll see me do that at one point in time. Here I'm just cleaning up some more of the unhinged jaw, make it look a little cleaner, taking a break from the mouth and to kind of think about how much I was going to retouch inside there. And went and picked up this shot and wanted one uniform tongue back there, so I picked this shot, scaled it up in order to use the scaled up tongue as a texture to patch some of the flaws back there. And then here I'm just working to clean it up and loving what I'm seeing here at this point, and just continue to kind of fine-tune the inside of his mouth. And the next thing up is to pick out a speaker. So since we shot David in a bunch of different angles, screaming and yelling, I wasn't sure which one we were going to pick. We shot him holding a speaker in front of his mouth at a whole bunch of different angles, turning his head different degrees in order to figure out, which one I was going to end up using later. So that's coming up here shortly. I remember seeing this shot in the studio and actually sketched down wrote down the image number, because I loved that little crick in his neck. It added some dimension to his head, that it looked like his jaw was actually larger than the back of his head. So I went and grabbed that and threw that in here. Now this is where I pick out the speaker for the shot. Again, kind of looking through them, I pull a couple of them over and put them next to his mouth, you'll see, just to kind of figure out which angle is going to work, and end up going with one here. And at this point I'm not for sure if I want to keep the mounting plate that's on the speaker And so at this point, I'm just going to clean up the speaker as best I can, get rid of all the extras, that shiny goo that's on the speakers. I'm sure some of you may know what that is. I have no idea, but I just wanted this iconic speaker looking graphic inside of his mouth instead of a realistic depiction of a speaker. So getting rid of that and just making a cone and a simple speaker ready to be placed in there, and again leaving the mounting bracket on there just to see how that works. Here I'm using a circle selection just to make sure I get a sharp edge around that cone while I'm retouching, just to make sure everything's crisp and clean before I put it in there. And at this point, this might be fine-tuning retouches before seeing if the speaker's going to work, but I was pretty confident this was going to work. Here, bringing in the Gibson logo, you'll see that I brought in a ring around the Gibson logo, and what I do with that is I'll transform and skew that ring to fit whatever the object, that graphic is going on. In this case, it was a circle, and it helps to quickly adjust that graphics angles to whatever I'm placing it on. So in this case, like I said, it was a circle, and just warped and skewed that circle until it fit on there, and the Gibson logo looks great on there. And then I delete the ring, added some shading to make it look like it's definitely screen printed on the cone of that speaker. You'll notice that I'm using the polygon lasso tool. I know people that use nothing but the pen tool with their selections. I don't do that for some reason. I love the polygon lasso tool. There's been some times in the past where I have used the pen tool if I need to use clipping paths and keep the selection. But when I'm just cleaning things up and doing one-time selections, I just grab the polygon lasso tool, go to work with that thing. It's always served me well, so that's what I end up using. You can see that I tested the speaker inside of the mouth, and I did not like the mounting bracket in there. It was looking odd. It was squaring up the speaker inside his mouth when, for the most part, his mouth is an oval. So it kind of looked odd in there. And again, I think if you're looking for a simple, iconic-looking speaker, you don't think of the mounting plate on there. And so I'm going to work here again with the polygon lasso tool, getting rid of what I don't want. I don't need to save that selection. So I'm just carving that plate out of there. Again, whenever I can use templates and selections like a circle selection to make retouch lines crisper and a lot more quicker, I'll use it like I am here by masking off the rest of the speaker. So I could just clone and retouch right up to that selection and not have to worry about if I'm following the shape of that outside oval of the speaker. That's just uses or serves as a guide to make sure the retouch back there is crisp and clean. So as you can see, the mounting bracket on the speaker was hiding some of the back end of that speaker, so I just complete that circle with another circle selection, continue retouching that around, and end up making a complete circle back there. And again, knowing that a lot of it may or may not be hidden, but I like giving myself options. I like, being able to put something in there, and I don't know how much of that tongue's going to show, and I don't know how much of the back of the speaker is going to show. And if I can do something quick and be able to just mask things in and out without saying, oh, I got to go and retouch more of that. I just would rather do that. It makes visualizing what's happening a lot quicker rather than to have to see past things that need to be retouched later. So love what I saw when I got the speaker into his mouth. It definitely helped that the mounting bracket wasn't there. So again, pretty confident in the selection of the speaker. So I went ahead and shaded the speaker to make it look like it was sitting back inside of his mouth. So here, I knew that the teeth in his mouth were going to be blown out. I just didn't know which teeth were going to be blown out. And so you're going to see me kind of roughing out masks of individual teeth to try to figure out which teeth I want blown out. What's it going to look like? And at one point in time, the teeth that I choose at the top here, it makes it look like he's a vampire, and that was not my thought on it. I actually brought some people in and said, "What do you think about these teeth being blown out?" And that was one of the first comments that were made was, "It looks like he's a vampire. The two top teeth, his fangs are left." And again, whenever you can get any kind of feedback before you do this extensive kind of retouching and illustration, because later you're going to see me have to illustrate the empty tooth sockets. And anytime you can get some opinions before you go to work on something, because after you're done, I think it's natural to not want to listen to those pieces of feedback that mean you're going to have to go back and redo something. So whenever you can rough something out, get some opinions, or even if it's just your opinion, to make sure you're going the right direction, that's important. So again, I'm just kind of getting a better idea of which teeth need to be blown out of his mouth, and roughing it out instead of moving a certain direction without getting any feedback at all. So as I think about, which teeth up above I'm going to keep and get rid of, I was pretty confident that I was set on what teeth that I wanted to be blown out of his mouth below. So at this point in time, I'm just kind of cleaning up the retouch along the row of teeth on the left side of the mouth. The tongue and some of the patches were hiding the bottom portion of the tooth where it goes into the gums. Again, some of the speaker is going to cover that, some of it's not. And while I was sitting there pondering which teeth would go and which would stay, I went ahead and cleaned the inside of this mouth up a little bit in order to see the complete row of teeth going backwards. So again, you're seeing that work being done here. Again, whenever you can keep moving on the image while you're thinking about other aspects of it, that's great. And again, you can see me turn on the speaker, and most of the speaker is going to be covering that. But in the end, I don't know if any final tweaks are going to be me pushing that speaker back into the mouth a little bit more and exposing some of that. And instead of doing that and going, "Oh, now I got more retouch work to do," I just would rather knock it out while trying to figure out which teeth I was going to go with. So again, agreeing with the comments that David looked a little bit vampire-ish, I guess you could say. I went ahead and brought back some of the teeth in the front to eliminate that kind of look. And here I'm just cleaning up the final choice of which teeth are going to go and which are going to stay, knowing that the next step is going to be illustrating those empty tooth sockets. So I'm basically prepping the mouth in order to do that kind of illustration, finishing all the final retouch work. So here I begin the illustration of the empty tooth sockets. And what I love to do is, instead of, sampling color and trying to hand paint textures, I try to grab textures from other aspects of the shot or another shot. And in this case, it was the very bottom of David's front gums that were really dark red, and knowing that those empty sockets were going to be really dark red down in there, I wanted to just start there, and then I could always, use color adjustment or painting in order to darken that. But I love using textures that are already there. There's no reason to create new ones when there's already stuff that you can pull from. So basically what I'm doing here is grabbing one of the tooth sockets that I already created, and then I duplicated that layer set and moved it over, and I'm just altering it a little bit to make sure it's fitting inside where that tooth would go. So I'm scaling it down, I'm scaling it horizontally in order to make it more of a tight circle than a wide oval, and that cut down on illustration time as well. Whenever you can use work you've already done, use work that's existing, do it. There's no reason to constantly reinvent the wheel. So again, here I'm starting with one of the empty tooth sockets at the bottom. I rotated it upside down, moved it up into that spot, and since it's at a different angle, I'll vertically scale it so it's more of a thinner oval at that different angle, and just going to work, finishing out those empty root sockets. Sometimes, like in this case, it may or may not work. You'll see me do some adjustments to it, paint a little bit more, start from scratch in some aspects of it. And so I'll let you watch this a little bit while I finish up the empty tooth sockets. Okay, so after the tooth sockets were illustrated, it was time to do some fine tuning. Again, the inside of David's mouth would be a lot darker beneath that speaker, so what you're seeing is doing some minor color adjusting. It's actually painting here of shadows that would be just beneath that speaker, right behind his teeth. So just doing some fine tuning here. After that, moving to some initial color correction on the rest of the shot, just like in the melting face video. Talked a little bit about dodge and burn kind of look. I use brightness and contrast and mid-tone curves to do this. But here you're seeing me just like in melting face video. I'm starting with the shadows, just darkening up the marks on David's face and around his neck to make sure that those strains in his cheek and beneath his eyes and in his neck are really kind of popping. And with that comes highlights as well. So, you'll see me start increasing highlights on the tops of those ridges and strains inside of his, on his face. For instance, right there on the cheek. Just making sure that it looks like his skin is just stretching as tight as possible, making those peaks and valleys a little bit deeper to increase that. So then moving to other aspects of his face, his nose, again, getting that kind of polished illustration, painting look on this, just little by little moving in increments, stepping back from it, looking at it, knowing I got to go in there and hit it up a little bit more. So watch this for a little bit and I'll chime back in when color correction is finished up here. So just like the melting face retouch, I took the time to go down and color adjust David's shirt and his arms, and you'll notice that the his right hand is missing from the shot. It didn't make the crop on the original shot, but I loved the basis of this shot, so this is where I started. And I knew that if I had to go get another fist from another shot, I could, but I was pretty confident I wasn't going to need it for any crop that we had, and luckily we didn't. So here you see me comparing again both of the retouches side by side because they are related to each other. How does the retouch look? Does the retouch look on the left a little bit more brightness and contrast than the other? And after some fine adjustments, I moved on to getting the projectile teeth. Now these teeth came from a stock shot. This is one of the only aspects of the photo that we didn't shoot. I found some random teeth laid out on a table on a stock shot. I went ahead and grabbed a few of them and added them to this shot. And you'll see that in the first version of this retouch, I've got the teeth shooting straight out of the mouth as if they were bullets coming out of his mouth. Once again, whenever I can get feedback, I definitely welcome it, and showed the retouch to some people. And one of the first comments were maybe they should be coming out at an angle more of like a sound wave. I tried that, loved it. It was a great improvement. And again, anytime that you can get some feedback, it's always great to do so. Always get another set of eyes looking on your retouches. So here I'm adding blur to the teeth to obviously simulate movement, and just kind of hand painting aspects of the blur, fading it out, knowing that some of the blur would be coming off a highlight more than a darker spot, so kind of masking out some of the blur, toning it down a little bit. Again, the teeth were a little flat, unlike the rest of the shot, so you're seeing me here add some contrast to the teeth, some depth to it, to make those teeth a little bit more rounded instead of these just flat bullets flying out of his mouth. So at this point in the retouch, I started having the same feeling that I had on the melting face video, which was I didn't think that we were pushing the retouch enough. It needed something more. On the melting face retouch, that's when I ended up stretching David's entire face and skull downward as if his whole skull was melting. Here, his teeth were moving, but there's just was something else missing, and I felt like David's entire head needed to be moving forward in this aggressive scream. So what you're going to see here is a motion blur added to the whole shot. What I did was merged everything onto one layer, of course keeping all the work below it intact, and then just kind of playing with aspects of this blur on the rest of David's head as if he was throwing himself forward while he was screaming. So I'm just trying some different tactics here, different levels of motion blur. A small one, large one. Is it coming off of his glasses? Is it coming off of his ears? Is this too much? And just eventually landing on this subtle blur that's coming off of certain aspects of his head to give him that forward motion, not just his teeth. As if he's kind of thrusting his head forward as he's screaming. Here, I've already done the work on the melting face retouch as far as what color to use in the background to create that halo gradient. So I just basically pulled it over and tried to use it at first and realized it was going to have to be tweaked a little bit more. So went ahead and sampled the color and started from scratch in order to achieve that halo look that matches David Wright's melting face shot as well. Here, again, making just fine adjustments to both shots to bring them in line with each other. I didn't think the melting face was contrast enough. I loved how hot the highlights looked in David Bean's speaker mouth photo. So I'm kind of bringing the melting face in line a little bit with that and adding a little bit more hot highlights to that and cleaning it up just a little bit more. There you see me make the final adjustment to the flying teeth so it looks more like a sound wave coming out of his mouth. And basically finishing up the retouch right there. And this is the final image that we ended up using. It turned out great. Loved doing it. It was fun. And here are the two images side by side. These two images kind of laid the visual foundation for pieces that were pointed at a younger generation or more edgier demographic. But in the end, it was only a very small portion of the campaign, these two images. We had a huge campaign pointed at a number of demographics, involved a digital campaign with user-generated content, social media, and a lot of that didn't make the cut as well in the show. But these were the two pieces that needed the most Photoshop work. And since, like I said, the producers had me film my screen, record my screen while I did it, thought I wouldn't let it go to waste. I'd show it here. So hope you guys enjoyed this. I had a great time doing it, and hope you learned some things watching me retouch this stuff. So thanks a lot.